J. Warner Wallace is a cold case homicide detective who's been investigating cold case murders in Los Angeles County for over a decade. His work has been featured on Fox News, Dateline, and Court TV. Now, we join him as he applies his investigative skills to making a case for Christianity.
Well, so I was just thinking about, did you notice anything different about me, by the way? No, you didn't notice anything. Yeah.
Did you shave?
Yes.
This morning? I would not have noticed. How long was it?
Well, I always trim it back down like almost every day to like a 4 at my goatee. So now it's gone. I think
so it was very noticeable, basically, and I should have noticed.
Yeah, that's why I thought you would say something about it.
Well, I haven't seen you in like 3 hours, so.
Yeah, well, I did it in 3 hours. I got rid of it. Anyway, I just thought, part of the thing is that when we do the trip we're about to start here in a couple of weeks, where we go up to Alaska with officers who have been involved in these shootings for marriage counseling. At the end, sometimes the officers want to celebrate it with like a rededication of their marriage, and I will usually put on a uniform to do their marriage rededications. And I don't want to have the facial hair when I'm wearing the uniform, so I was going to shave it anyway. And so,
but aren't you going to be up there for like 2 weeks? You're not going to have another time to shave it?
Well, you could shave it, but then you have to bring. What am I going to do? It's just easier if you go.
And I guess then they meet you with no facial hair, and you don't look.
Yeah, and it's just that there's like this is a little bit more like less. Like, I can't bring clippers and all this stuff you have to do. Just shave your face, and then it's just easy. Then you're already shaved before you. You don't have to shave it until the actual day of the rededication, but it's just easier not to have to kind of trim around your goatee and all that nonsense. So I decided, no, I'm just going to get rid of it. But it's nice of you to notice, by the way.
I did not notice.
It's because you're a jerk.
I want to say it's because I have to look at the camera, and so I'm not looking directly at you all the time. But it's not that. I just
you just didn't notice. I know. I thought last weekend was pretty cool. It's interesting to me that when we spent the last weekend making s'mores, that we didn't do that much when you were growing up, did we? We didn't have a fire pit to make s'mores in. Only when we went camping we would make s'mores.
Yeah, only camping, and we weren't like camping. We weren't like the big camping family. I mean, we camped sometimes, but not that often.
No, not that often. And we did go out there. Like we would be with Opa in Texas, and we would like maybe do a fire and do s'mores. But what is it about s'mores that Olivia thinks is so great? She likes s'mores. I can tell. What is it?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's just the s'more itself is good, or if it's just sort of the ambiance of sitting around a fire, talking, and doing whatever. I mean, that's one thing we don't have in our apartment. We don't have a fireplace. We can't go out in our backyard to a fire pit. So that's like, we gotta go to your house, or we gotta go to the beach. That's the only way to do it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think that sometimes too that as I watch her make this, there's something almost primal about s'mores, about fires. You're watching the fire, you're around the fire, you got a stick and some food, and it
makes you think like maybe you could have been a cave person. Like I'm tough enough. I could have lived in a cave around a fire, even though we're using a gas fire and nothing that we were eating is caught by ourselves.
I know. As a matter of fact, this is how lame it was.
And you can burn a s'more and it's still good.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good question then. So there's a question that right there is worth asking. So what are you like you're like me, right? You don't want it to be crisp at all. You want the marshmallow just to be brown but not catch on fire. Or do you want it to catch on fire?
If I could do it, I guess I would brown it. But I usually just am not patient enough, and I end up getting it at least burned to some extent. So I just live with it.
I know people who think that's the best way to make a s'more, is that they're like, okay, so you want this thing to be crispy and then gooey.
Well, you want it to be crispy because then there's a little bit extra carcinogen in there.
Yeah, I know, exactly. You know what I don't like about s'mores is that when they're really gooey, is then you end up, you layer it with the chocolate. I want the chocolate to melt a little bit. You have the graham cracker on it, but then when you bite into it, it just squeezes all over your hands and basically burns your flesh like a sci-fi film, like an old bad Star Trek sci-fi film where it burns you. I don't like that part. I almost think it'd be better if it was a raw marshmallow.
The big question is, how do you feel about like when they do the fancy graham crackers? Where it's like it's not just the whatever random brand and they put some cinnamon and sugar and stuff on there. Does that elevate it, or does that take away from the... Because I kind of feel like you want it as basic as possible. Just regular Hershey's chocolate, no dark chocolate, nothing fancy, and just your run-of-the-mill graham cracker. But sometimes that you'll get those packages that have like all fancy ingredients. They're trying to really spruce it up.
I wonder if there's any, there's this debate about whether the Constitution is a fixed document that represents a view of the Founding Fathers that's unchanging, or whether it's a living document that changes in every generation, has to be reinterpreted. I wonder if there's a relationship between people who kind of hold that fixed view, even of Scripture, or and people who are like traditionalists when it comes to s'mores. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like, you can do it with dark chocolate and with a cinnamon sugar graham cracker, but then it's not really a s'more. It's just something you're reinterpreting, but it's not really a s'more, because a s'more is the basic, run of the mill. And I think that you want the contrast of flavors. Like, look, the chocolate's the sweet part. The texture is from the marshmallow. And I think the graham cracker is really just there to kind of hold it all together. Do you want the graham cracker to be the sweet part? That's what the chocolate is.
Yeah, that's how I feel. We went to this, we used to like to go to this restaurant in downtown Long Beach that is not there anymore. And the food was good, but one of their desserts on the menu was something, it was basically a s'more. And they called it something like that. And so we ordered it one of the first times we ever went there. And it was like, they were trying to be artistic, and it was deconstructed. So it was basically like dust for the graham cracker, like ground up graham cracker. The marshmallow was like some type of white liquid drizzle, but it was not really like a marshmallow. And I don't even know, maybe a couple chocolate chips or something. It was one of the worst desserts we've ever had at a restaurant, and we probably paid a lot of money for it too.
Right,
because you can't beat the basic. It's already done. The basic s'more is just the way it should be.
So you're like me in the sense that, hey, but the same way I don't think that we have to understand the context in which the biblical authors wrote Scripture, because and that's really how we should be interpreting it today.
And the way the cavemen made their s'mores.
Exactly. So this reinterpretation of like the artistic s'more is like heresy. It's like, this is the progressive, like progressive Christianity. This is progressive s'mores. I mean, it's like I don't mean politically progressive, but I mean the idea that this is now something you can s'more can be anything you want it to be.
Well, maybe it can be, but it's not going to be as good.
Yeah, I think the same thing. So today we started talking a little bit about the nature of like what it is we're doing as apologists, and I thought it was interesting. First of all, the best conversations always seem to happen over a meal. Isn't that true? That's always been true. That's even true of us when we were having s'mores. That it's really just an opportunity. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's because
that's something you taught me, was that was a very like intimate bonding experience to share a meal with someone.
No, that's true. You don't eat with people you don't like. Isn't that weird? I mean, you could. But most of the time, even like when we go to a restaurant and they have the long bench seat and the little tables that have like 18 inches, just enough space between so you can get into the seat. I hate eating at those kinds of places. Do you feel that? I mean, just me? I mean, you're not as cynical as I am, but you're a nicer person.
Hey, at least most places give you the space, because sometimes you go to a restaurant and it's just a communal table. You're just
that's true, and that's true.
Wherever.
And that's good. That's
now you're
fine.
really bumping elbows with you.
Yes, but you notice that when they do that, like when it's like a family style restaurant where you're in a big table, that they leverage that. They want it to be familial, and they everything is served in a way that encourages this kind of dialogue. Like it's like going to a bed and breakfast where everyone comes down for breakfast. The idea is that they're trying to encourage, but I think most restaurants...
As though you all knew each other, yeah.
Yes, but if you're taking a date to a restaurant, do you really want to be... Maybe. But probably not if it's like
on the kind of date, yeah.
Yeah, right? So you're not going to go to a restaurant where you want some privacy, some sense that, hey, it's just you and me eating here, and you get to pick who you're going to eat with. Yeah, but I think that's the conversations we typically have. I mean, even though we usually talk when we're running, but it's the meal after the run where you're, I don't know. First of all, I don't talk too much when we're running, unless cause you're always way ahead of me with Mom. It's you and Mom talking. I'm listening to this to the radio because no one's back there with me.
I feel like on the run we're out of breath, we're tired, we're a little cranky, so that's where we get really like revved up about a topic, and then at the meal is when we can like collect our thoughts and reach some kind of type of like consensus.
Okay, is that you are you talking about me then? That's what you're talking about, because you're saying to me, you're saying when we run, you get cranky because you're tired and you're being a jerk to me while we're running. That's what you're saying, isn't it?
Well, I get tired.
I'll try to do better on that. I'm not really trying to be like obstinate. But you know that we talk about all these issues, and you never listen to me, which I love because you're just so stubborn. But I still try. I think we're probably both possess that a little bit of that. Where we've thought about these issues, and we kind of think where we land is the right. We've thought about how we landed here, and so it's not like we're coming to these things uninformed. But we do, and Mom drives Mom crazy that we're talking like that to each other. That we're like not arguing, but we're not agreeing sometimes, and she wants peace. She wants us to be in this la-di-da, like everything's butterflies and rainbows, and this is not the run is to bring us together in joy and harmony with nature, and it's not supposed to be the place where you hash out theological differences or theological things we're talking about. But I think in the end, you're right. I mean, we've probably done that all our whole lives. Is we'll start off kind of debating the issue, and then at some point you sit down at a meal and you figure out where you land together.
Well, you always let me. Probably it worked against you, but you've always let me disagree and talk to you as though we were equals. Even though I've always been. Obviously, you have way more experience, way more education than I do, or I always did throughout my whole life, but you would let me argue back with you, probably fed into my sense of ego that somehow I was good enough to argue theological discussions, apologetics with you, even though you were so much more knowledgeable in the subject than I was.
Well, I always thought of it that way because when you were born, it was Mom and I for 8 years before you came, or 9 years before you were born, and so just the two of us, and then we had a third person in this, this unity here, this union, and it was you, and I just kind of took it. Now look, I was always Dad, but I always thought I've treated you in terms of content of what we're going to talk about. I treat you like a guy, just like you're like an adult, right? So I try to protect your innocence as long as you can, but I also want to raise the bar and involve you in these kinds of conversations. But I do know that between us, and this is one of the things we were talking about today that I thought was good, that I am much more glass half. I would have been a good risk assessment person. I would have been somebody who would have been good in that job, because I'm always seeing the danger behind every doorway. What in the room is going to kill you first? That view of everything is a threat, everything is a potential risk. The glass is always half empty, and I wondered for a long time if that was because my dad, Opa, your grandfather, they divorced pretty early, and it was just me and your grandma, my mom, your grandmother, growing up, and I just felt like there was a risk behind every door. I felt like we were at risk. We didn't have an adult male, and she never remarried, so it was just the two of us. And when we would go places, I would see like a risk at every. I didn't want to go anywhere. I mean, back in the '60s and '70s, well, especially in the '60s, it wasn't that common that you would be just a one, mom raising her kid alone. And so if you're always raised in a scenario where you feel like it's fragile, like it could fall apart at any time, and like there's no one there to protect you, well, then you become the kind of person who's always looking for the next threat, the next, and that, I think it helps in doing investigations, but it doesn't make you a nice person to be around. You know what I mean? Like you're always. So I wonder if because you were raised with somebody who was there to make sure that you were safe, that if that allowed you to see the stuff that's good in the world without having to always assess what is bad about the world. And that's where I think we differ.
I'm sure that's got to be a big part of it. I mean, you and Mom let me grow up in a very blessed, privileged environment where stability was the norm. So I didn't have to go around worried that life was going to fall apart at like the smallest little thing. So I didn't have to worry about the little things as much in terms of are the little bad moments in life when things don't go my way, are these like threatening to the very foundation of reality for me and my sense of self or purpose or anything like that. So I'm sure I have a higher tolerance for things if they don't go my way, or a higher tolerance probably for risk.
Yeah.
I might take more risks or different types of risks, and if they don't work out, it might not bother me as much.
Yeah, I think
because
that's a good
you
point.
could let me grow up with the idea that like life was pretty stable and safe, just as that's like a fact of reality, that things are okay, generally okay. You have good days, you have bad days, but generally they're okay.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think that I've always been somebody who probably purchased too much insurance. I had life insurance and all kinds of insurance. You can be insurance poor, because you're thinking. I always thought of it as, well, we had no net growing up, so when I had the ability to establish a financial net, then I wanted to do it right away, because I felt like, yeah, this is my responsibility. Also, my mom had always talked about our financial. We were so at the bottom of the earning ability, just with one person who was a hairdresser, trying to get us through all that I felt like it was very financially fragile. So when I finally got to a point where I was just comfortable, and also this is what I also like about you, is that you and I were still driving the same cars we were 10 years ago. How long have you had your car? Longer than me.
Yeah, I think I just had it like 12 years.
Okay, so I've had
11 or 12 years, something like that. But yeah, I think, there's pros and cons to everything, because because of that though, you're more focused on having a security, like having a safety net financially. And I have to, even though we're living below our means, and so I don't think we're making unwise financial decisions. I do have to make sure I remind myself that it would be wise to have a safety net, like a financial safety net, because I don't see it as foundational, I think, as you felt it was growing up. I didn't feel the need for we're about to run out of money any minute, and so then that becomes a lower priority for me. But I don't want it to be not a priority at all, where I'm not making wise investments into my future. I want to be able to give some type of pass something down to my children when they get old enough for me to do something for them. But left to my own devices, I might not be as concerned about that, because I just have a different outlook, I guess.
Well, that's why I'm only bringing that up, because I think it changes the way we talk about God to people around us, even the way we would approach the apologetics enterprise, because you've always been much more hopeful and more positive. So we were talking about that. I think it's really interesting. And it just dawned on me today. This is how stupid I am. Okay, I just don't like, we always use 1 Peter 3, and I'm going to open up a browser here. Hang on here. Let me open up a browser here to look at it. I'm going to use I'll just use Logos, the best software ever. Okay, Bible software, I think. But I want to look at 1 Peter 3. So you can tell I'm really prepared, aren't I? 1 Peter 3. And
I'm just surprised you don't have it committed to memory.
Well, I have it committed to memory, but I want to look at every translation, because this, if you think about, the idea that we're supposed to be able to be ready to give the reason for the hope we have. I think most of the time when we're doing apologetics, those of us who are interested in apologetics, we're thinking, okay, look, we have to be ready to make the case for why we believe this is true. We'll say it that way, even though that's not what the verse says. We'll say that verse supports our apologetics enterprise of defending what's true about Christianity, show people why you think Christianity is true based on any number of ways you could approach that. We've already talked about some of those, but the point is, that's not what the thing, it's talking about give the people a reason for the hope you have. And I've never really, I don't think I've ever seen that as the target of the enterprise. Right, that it was. So let me go. So I wanted to. Only reason why I'm going to look at this, and I want to look at it in all the different translations. Right. So if you look at it in the ESV, so we're at one edge of this. Right. But in your hearts honor Christ, the Lord is holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect. Okay. Well, if you said, okay, the goal is not to defend the rationality and historical reliability of the scriptures related to the resurrection, and a lot of times we embrace that as our mission as apologists, but no, your goal is to defend the hope you have. It's hope targeted, not resurrection targeted, or hope focused, not resurrection focused. I think that would change the way we do things. I think that would change the approach we would take.
What do you mean, like, though, when you say not resurrection focused? You just mean...
Well, I mean, it'll end up being something with the resurrection, but I mean, and let me go one more step. Here's it in the NIV. So now we're kind of in the middle of the translation spectrum, and this is how it sounds in the NIV. But in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give their reason for the hope you have. Here it is again. It's hope, right? Okay, so let me go one more. Let's see if we can find something a little smushier. Let's see if we can find New Living Translation. Okay, a little less word for word. Instead, you must worship Christ as Lord in your life. And if someone asks you about your hope as a believer, that's different, a little bit different. Your hope as a believer. So here's my question: would it be any different? Like, what do we mean by hope? What does that word even mean? If we had to have a synonym, if we had to take a different word there and stick it in there, what word could you stick in there? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is something about like optimism that is implied by hope. I actually was just pulling up, while you were looking at the Bible, I was pulling up Miriam, and she says that hope is a feeling of expectation and desire for a certain thing to happen. And so I think when you were like, oh, it's not resurrection focused, I assumed that you did not mean that our hope is not in Jesus or something like that.
No, right. But I mean is could we make a case not just for the resurrection, but could we make a case for hope? In other words, that there's good reason to be hopeful. And of course it's going to be involved, like this, it's going to be connected to our hope of what? Our expectation of what? Like, what is the expectation we have that we're hoping for? Like, you don't find yourself doing that very often. I don't. I'm assuming that you know that if the resurrection is true, you ought to have hope. But I wonder, like, this is a generation. You tell me, is your generation interested in hope? Maybe even more than mine?
I think people are interested in hope, but I don't know if everybody always sees. I don't know if, and it may just be a caricature of a culture, a media that is not friendly to Christians, but I think that potentially, if you talk to a bunch of people who are not Christians about what's their perception of Christians, I don't know if everybody's perceptions of Christians are, they're these really hopeful, joyous people. Now, I'm sure some of them would say that, and maybe individuals in their life, but is that the perception of the church as a whole?
Yeah.
And that's not to say that there's never time for like lamentation. And you definitely see that all throughout the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, especially when things are going poorly for the Israelites. You'll see them, be sad over the bad things that are going on in life. So it's not to say like that we should be just all happy all the time.
Yeah, not ignorantly bliss. It's not ignorant bliss. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or that we can't have moments or seasons or prolonged periods where we're really feeling down because of legitimate things that are going on in our life that are difficult to deal with, that are sad, So it's not like we're not trying to cast like judgment on a particular feeling, but I think in the end, if Jesus really died for us and all our sins really are forgiven, then we do have something to look forward to, this expectation that we'll be reunited with God, and that should impact like our overall outlook in life. We can still be sad by our day-to-day life, our family member passes away. Sure, we can mourn, but overall, in terms of our overall view of life, I would hate to think that we're going through life just down about ourselves, about Christianity, about God's work in the world, when there is something to be hopeful for, to be glad about, which is Jesus' sacrifice and this hope of reunification with Him.
Yeah, I'm looking over here at the side to look at my logos software. That the word means is either translated typically as hope, expectation, or prospect of a future, something to look forward to, some reasoning or confidence respecting this thing you're actually looking at in the future. So there is a sense of a couple things here that are in the Greek translation of the word. That one is an expectation, and a certain level of confidence about that expectation you have. But what I think is really even like, it could have just said, the verse could have been written differently. It could have been written, always be prepared to make a defense for anyone who asks you why you believe this is true. But the idea that we're supposed to have hope, like that should be the feature of our lives that people question. Not just that we believe this crazy thing. Why would you believe that? That no, we're so hopeful that it's obvious we're hopeful, and it raises a question. And to be hopeful,
the thing we're defending is something that's great. We should take joy in this thing we're defending. We're not just defending because it's true, but maybe dreary. It's true and great.
Yeah, so I think that this idea of joy and optimism is embedded in the word. It's not like, hey, you know what? I did this crime and I'm expecting to get sentenced for 15 years. Okay, that is about an expectation. That is about a future confidence. I have confidence that this thing's going to come to pass. But that's not what we mean by hope. You would say, well, I expect to get punished. But you're not saying you're hoping to get punished, or you're anticipating it.
You might be hopeful for the day that the punishment ends.
Yeah, and that
might be
means
hopeful for the day you get out.
That's right. And so the idea of the word hope is embedded a certain sense of joy, of something positive, of something optimistic. So this is where I think that I look, like, as much as you probably look to me as a model for something that you want to reflect into the world, I look to you as a model for something I want to be. I wish when my parents were divorced, I spent my entire life trying to make sure that was not the way that I raised my family, because I just realized that most of the pessimism that I hold about what's the worst thing that could happen, I'm always looking at the worst case scenario, is embedded in that kind of despair that came out of feeling as though you had no net and had been abandoned in some way, and that things were just not quite right. And so I wanted to make sure that was, and I see this in you. I see in you, in almost any discussion we have, I'm always the voice of pessimism. You're always the voice of optimism. So I think we're going to stop right here because we're going to get short on our, this is where the break will come up for our NRBtv audience. So I'm glad you're with us at NRBtv. And we'll be continuing the discussion on the backside for our audience at YouTube. But I think that's part of what I am concerned about. Like I think, okay, so how can I shift my own apologetic? This is one of the reasons why, Jimmy, now I very seldom will make a case for Christianity that does not include a presentation of some sort of the gospel. That's the thing. That is the thing that gives me hope. It's not the case for the gospel, or the case for the reliability of Scripture, or the case for the resurrection. It's that the gospel is the source of all joy and hope. And if we don't get to that as part of our presentation, we're probably missing it.
Yeah, it's tough because it's like you're mentioning, hey, what's the how do we incorporate hope into our apologetics? I think it's just something I would hope to be in not only apologetics but just everything in Christianity. And I think it's something about like our demeanor or the you and I we've seen, every Christian who's ever been to church has seen great speakers and speakers that were just not that crazy about. Hopefully the regular pastor's back next week kind of thing. And there's a lot of things that make a great speaker great. But I think one thing that I'm looking for, people do draw a following from being angry and upset. And I think that if there's something good for like in the short term, if there's something bad going on, sure, we should be upset. We shouldn't be afraid to be upset. But I think that ultimately there needs to be something positive that we can kind of like hold on to, even in the midst of a world that's not the way that we want. I don't want to go down the path where we've sort of just given up and we're just in despair all the time as Christians because things aren't going our way and nobody likes us and we're just negative.
Well, you and I were talking about this earlier. Do you think that's a generational difference? Because I've had a chance to see the trajectory over 60 years of where the culture is headed, and you haven't had to look at it for maybe the whole 60 years.
I think that I mean this is some speculation on my part, but I was telling you I was talking to one of the pastors at our church who's younger than me, but maybe like 4 or 5 years younger than me. So I think he's still in the millennial range, but he's getting close to the Gen Z, and he kind of felt the same. So I'm sure that I got to imagine there's some truth for some people about it. That we were saying that for us it might be easier to be optimistic, or not to be so easily discouraged, maybe is a better way to say it. It's a little bit easier for us to not be discouraged because we didn't feel like when we were growing up, and this is also because we're growing up in Southern California. Maybe there's parts of the country that you could grow up and still feel like everyone around you is a Christian and you're in a great Christian environment and Christianity is strong, and that's awesome. But for us, in our generation here in Southern California, we did not grow up in a place where there was a lot of Christians around. Even going to bigger churches, I might have known a lot of Christians, but still the majority of people in my life, day to day, were not believers for, all through my life. Especially as you start to get independence in junior high, high school, you go to college, and so it wasn't like there was this time that we perceived like, oh, there was this golden age of Christianity, and now we're losing it. For us, there's no loss. The culture we're in now, I guess it's different than we were kids 15, 20 years ago, but it's not that different to us. But I'm sure if we grew up 100 years ago and thought everyone around me is Christian and always going to be.
You had to say
100
not years
you.
ago?
No.
I think I'm that old. That's the analogy to your dad, 100 years.
Okay. No. I almost wonder if there really was a time. I kind of wonder how much we're looking at the past in rose-colored glasses and saying, oh, in the past, it was like Christian utopia, and now it's so secular. I don't know if, maybe more people said they were Christians, but I think we can look back at the historical realities of every culture that ever said that they were predominantly Christian and see that things that are not consistent with the Bible are happening all throughout history. So I don't know if there really is like this wonderful glory age, but I definitely could see if you grew up in a time or place where you thought the majority of people around you were Christians, and now you're seeing that wane. Now the majority of people around you are not Christians. Man, that must be hard to take, and I'm sure it's very, it's like sad. It's emotional to feel like, wow, you thought you had something good, and now it's gone. But for people like me, I don't know if I ever had that. I never thought I had that thing that was so great, and now it's gone. I have seen the culture change throughout my life, but not from Christian to secular, just from secular to another form of secular. I remember like growing up, I remember all these Christian periodicals and radio stations were all railing against Sex and the City, when that was like current, when that was current in the 90s or whatever years the original show was on, 90s to 2000s, right? Or something. And talking about how, wow, this is so against Christian values. And recently I was listening to a podcast, not a Christian podcast, somebody who would definitely not agree with a lot of Christian values, as far as I could understand from listening to like the one episode of the podcast I listened to. And they're criticizing the show, probably for different reasons than maybe a Christian would. But they also are seeing they're pointing out the same problems that Christians were pointing out 20 years ago, but they have a different solution. Like, where the Christian would have said, "I wish they were more Christian," these people are saying, "Well, I think if we just changed this, it would be better in this way." But they're also the culture is realizing that there was something wrong like back then, but they're not turning to Christianity to find the answer. And to me, that's really fascinating because I think it shows. It's almost like being a sociological observer, you can see that the culture really is struggling with, hey, we wanted to find meaning or value in these things that we thought were going to do it back when I was a kid, and it didn't do it for them, and now they're looking for something else. And so that's what's in my mind, I think that's what's driving some of the cultural change. We're trying to find that thing that's gonna make everything right again.
Again, it comes down to
but we have that.
Yes, it's an apologetic for
as
hope.
a Christian, we have that. So to me, I'm not sad that the culture I'm living in is secular. I can see that they're searching for something. It's almost like, maybe this is like what it was like for you. I don't have any kids, but I gotta imagine it's hard to watch your kids grow up and make mistakes, and you kind of know, like, man, if they just did it this way, it would all work out. But at some point, there's some level of like they're searching, and eventually maybe you'll get an opportunity to like point them in the right direction. And I kind of feel like that's where Christians are today. We have the answers. We have something that's valuable to help these people, and so to me, I'm not like discouraged when I see somebody living a life that is not Christian, or even being upset with Christians. It just motivates me to want to help them see, no, what Christianity has is good, and it's actually probably what they're looking for. They just don't realize it yet.
Yeah. So what is it then? If you thought, okay, I've been doing this project now you've been doing it for a number of years. I've been doing it publicly for about 10, even though I was doing it for all the years you were growing up, just in the local church. So what is it that would would our approach be any if we said, okay, no, I really want to restore hope, not just make a case, but I believe that Christianity is the source of hope. How would that then change the project? How would that change the enterprise? So I would think that, number one, I don't use the word hope a lot when I'm making a case. I just don't. I need to. I need to recenter that this is about hope. If I think that the thing that we can offer you, that you ought to be so impressed by that you would even ask a question, you would ask, what's the reason for your hope? That's in Scripture. No one ever asks me the reason for my hope. They'll ask, why do you think that's true, you nut job? They'll ask that kind of question. Why would you think that's true given X? Why would you think this is true given Y? But I don't think it's probably because I'm not living my life in such a way that they may see this hope. Like, maybe I'm not, because I'm not a hopeful, I'm a pessimist. I'm not optimist. I mean, maybe it's a matter of me saying that optimism and joy needs to be more of a focus in my expressions of my life in front of people, so that people would say, where are you getting that sense of optimism? Like this, I love being around you, because every time I'm around you and I get done and you leave, I'm like, wow, I feel better. I feel better for the state of the world. I feel better because you're an optimist. You make me smile every time you come over. You say something and just looking at your face, I'm always smiling. So how do we exude? I think part of it is that I got to be more aware of the fact that my negativity, like, you know what happens? All of our apologist friends, the people who all have these YouTube channels, they all call me when they've got an issue, a problem, because they want to hear what the pessimist thinks. Like, what's the worst case scenario? And then
you've already thought about it, so you got the answer.
Like, they want the risk assessment, and I'll tell them what I think, and then they'll be like, later on they'll tease me. They'll say, "Oh yeah, I only call Jim when I want to hear the bad news," but they apparently want to hear the bad. But I'm like, do I want to be the guy?
Well, weren't you the one who famously tried to talk one of the executives of CSI out of becoming an executive for this new show, CSI?
Yeah. As a matter of fact,
being like one of the biggest shows ever.
Yeah, and when she first started, I'm like, you're not going to leave your job at the county, working in the crime lab, to do this show you want to do. But what's it going to be called? CSI? That'll never work. Like, I'm telling her, don't do it. You're a fool. You got medical insurance. You got a pension plan. You're not going to leave. But then she ends up, being one of the most prolific writers of the genre, and produced her own CSI Miami. I think she was the executive producer on CSI Miami. Yeah, so you're right. I mean, I'm always seeing how can the train wreck, rather than where can the train take you.
No, and listen, I think there's value in both. It's not like we should be just blindly running into danger and not being wise about things. So I think there's just some type of balance, and I think what's hard for me is, sometimes I'll see Christians and I almost will see them acting, well, this is how I perceive it. It seems like some Christians will almost have like a fight or flight response, where they feel threatened by the world around them, by they see the culture is not going the way that they want it to go. And I mean, I probably agree with them a lot of times in their feelings of like, is this good or bad? But I'll see this fight or flight thing where they want to hold on to something that they think they're losing so bad that they'll be vicious to try to protect it. Maybe vicious to the point of turning other people off. Now people don't want to hear you. Or they want to escape, and now they don't want to interact with people. and I think that sort of would also, if we all, removed ourselves from society and lived out in the woods, maybe we would feel we would be maybe less engaged with the culture, but I don't know how much we're accomplishing for God in terms of helping spread his message. But I can see why people would act that way if they feel threatened by the world around us. But I think having part of that, like trying to be optimistic, and it's not like I don't ever get down, but I don't want to be in a position where I'm always reacting because I perceive everything as a threat. I want to try, if I can, to see the opportunity in the world around me, not the things that are threatening to me. There's a lot of concern when me and Olivia have kids and we're raising them here. If we raise them in Southern California, there's a lot of fear of what's going to happen to them, what's their faith can be like. So I understand the worries, but I don't want to let that worry actually negatively affect my ability to reach others with the gospel.
Yeah,
I'm sure I have many, many times, but I want to stop that.
Yeah, you said something that struck me too, because I started wondering, okay, so there's 3 Jim Wallaces in our family that are still alive. And one of them is 82, one of them is 61, one of them is 33. If you look at them on a spectrum of optimism, clearly at one end of the spectrum is the 33-year-old. At the other end of the spectrum is the 82-year-old. Now, you might say, well, I'm closer to the 82 in my pessimism than so I think, okay, so is it a generational thing, or is it just the consequence of living on planet Earth for a period of time? I don't think I was ever as optimistic as you. Ever. Growing up, I was always, looking for the thing that was going to kill me. And so that's very different. But look, like your grandfather, my dad, he's living in the middle of the woods in the middle of nowhere. A lot of retired cops do that because it's the job that kind of gives them a pessimistic view of humanity, of the world around them, all the dangers of the world around you. Look, what's the first thing we're doing when we're teaching young officers? When I was a young officer and I was being taught by my training officer, it was really the thing that would get me fired first was going to be officer safety. Like, are you somebody who doesn't see the threats? Are you somebody who's so unaware of what's going to kill you that you're going to end up dead, or end up with your partner dead because you put your gun in front of the suspect, or you didn't maintain a certain distance, or you just dumbly walked up on things as if there's no possible threat. And so I think that life can sometimes move you. You might have been optimistic, and people maybe are optimistic and are hopeful when they're young, and then they go through trials and troubles and ups and downs, and they see all the risks, and by the time they're 70, the optimism, this is why whenever you see, why is it we're so impressed with old people, I'm not one of them, but I mean even older than me, who are still so hopeful. And you're like, wow, because we don't expect it. We expect life to kind of beat you with a stick until you lose your hope. And then when you see someone who is old with hope, you go, I want some of that.
It's kind of interesting how you are talking about, hey, the most important thing to you is being taught, like, to see the threats. Because I think that's valuable. It's not like we don't want to be, especially like when we're making an apologetic argument, we want to know, like, what's the other person going to say back to me? What's the weaknesses in my case? So we want to know what the threats are, but you wouldn't be, you as that young officer would also be criticized if you responded to the threats inappropriately.
Right.
Like if you because somebody was a small threat, you beat them over the head immediately. Now you've like totally overreacted to something that was too small. I would imagine you'd be even more criticized or more quickly fired if you ran away from the threat. But at the same time, you were expected to and like it's this idea that you are supposed to know something's dangerous, but still do it, and do it in a way that's going to be effective.
And with an appropriate response, that's not that is appropriate to the level of threat you're facing. That's why we have a force continuum. We're supposed to pick a level of response that's appropriate to what is the true threat, not your crazy perception of the threat.
So I guess when I think about like how I want to reach people for God, I don't know if I've figured out. I'm not going to say I've cornered the market on what's the best way to do it. But what I want to think about is I want to see what's going on in the world around me. I don't want to be blind to sad things, bad things, negativity. But I want to make sure I'm reacting in a way that is going to be effective to engage the threat, not overreactive, not in a like emotional, I've got to destroy this thing or I've got to run away from this thing, but just because the biggest thing with Christianity is the threat is somebody that we're trying to save.
Yeah.
The threat is a person who is vehemently against us and thinks that we're all just crazy, either wasting our time or maybe we're like actually like a drain on society.
Yeah,
all us crazy
yeah.
Christians. That's the person we're trying to reach with the gospel.
Yeah,
we're not trying to destroy that.
That's right. We're not trying to isolate
We're trying
them from
to
us.
convince them that they want to be like us.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You know, and so it's one thing if we just want to win the argument or we just want them to leave us alone. Like we can be very harsh to somebody and they'll leave us alone. But the goal isn't to be left alone. The goal is to get that person to join our team, and that's so much harder. And we have to be that much more careful because look how easily people can be. I mean, even in our own lives, we can be so easily turned off by religious people because they did something offensive, or we didn't understand what they were trying to say to us. And we're religious, we're Christians, and we can still be offended by another Christian, let alone somebody who doesn't understand Christianity at all. So that's just what I want to keep in mind. I want to be thinking about what's actually going to be effective.
Well, since we talked this morning, I can tell you for me, I am going to be more hope focused, and I want to talk about the beauty of that hope, not just the rationality of the overall worldview and how well it stands up to the evidence. I want to be able to communicate that the hope isn't the byproduct. The hope isn't just luckily for us, it also gives us hope. That instead, really, this is what God has come to do with us, not to convince us by something by way of evidence, but to provide hope, a hope of eternity. And that's something that I think sometimes in the Apologetics project we lose sight of, right? That there's an innate sense of optimism in hope, and I have to be a more optimistic person. I'm about to spend a month this summer with police couples, many of whom have lost their hope, and it's not going to be enough for me to restore their confidence in the evidential truth of Christianity. A large part of this now needs to be, can I help them restore their hope? And I think this is possible, but it has to start with, like, does anybody want to be, like, a lot of this is, back to we talked about this a couple of weeks ago about identity. Do you want to wear the t-shirt? Do I want to be a part of that pessimistic downer group? Probably not. But people are looking for identity, they're looking for purpose, and they're looking for hope. And I think that we have it, but I doubt that many people are living the kind of Christian life where people are even asking that question in 1 Peter 3. What's the hope coming from? Where's that optimism coming from? So
I think you can see how much is kind of like weighing on us that we would talk. I was thinking as we're talking about this conversation, we often will have the same conversation so many times on screen, but definitely off. But I think it shows how much it's been kind of weighing on both of our minds, or at least I know on mine. I don't want to see like Christianity crumble in the face of adversity, And I don't think it will. I think you look at the historic Christianity, it has always survived. But I just hate to see, one of the hardest things to do is to see like good guys or the good quote unquote good people, the people who are your friends, your family, fail. And I hate to see Christian leaders lose their character or become despondent. And I think that there is such an opportunity for us, especially as the culture I imagine, is going to continue to move in a more and more secular direction and more and more away from Christianity, at least in the short term. There's such an opportunity for us because if we all live in a Christian community where everybody's convinced of that God is real, I guess there is some work of God we can still do in terms of being kind to one another. But look at how much more work there is for us to do for God in a culture where it's not just about the way we treat each other, but it's about sharing with somebody who's lost the gospel. I mean, there's something exciting. If we really love God, we would want to serve him. And we're in a culture that is more and more against us. There's more and more opportunities for us to serve him. And so in some ways, this should almost be like a rallying thing that should bring Christians together and be very mission focused, that, hey, now we have something great we can do that maybe we couldn't do it in another circumstance, and let's do the work that's specific to this time and place.
Yeah. Well, that is a very hopeful place to stop the conversation. So, very good. You got me thinking this week. Appreciate you, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, I'll see you next time.
To hear more from J. Warner Wallace, please visit coldcasechristianity.com. For more information on this week's topic, visit youtube.com/coldcasechristianity with J. Warner Wallace. Thank you for joining us on this Cold Case Christianity broadcast.